Welcome to the Empowered Women Life Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Karen Bashford. This podcast is for every woman who has ever felt limited by her past, silenced by trauma, or held back by society's expectations. Each week, we will share powerful stories, expert insights, and practical tools to help you become the leader of your own life. Today's topic is something that perhaps I need to speak more about, and that is red flags in a relationship. Now, obviously, as I was growing up, I wasn't aware of red flags. And even when I went into my marital relationships, I wasn't aware of red flags. But nowadays, I would say that I've got a lot of experience about red flags. Now, I'm aware, obviously, there's different kinds of red flags depending on the relationship, whether it's a family member, a sibling perhaps, parents, but also those relationships we have that can be at work and how we handle them. And obviously partner relationships. I'm not sure what is the most damaging, quite truthfully. Childhood obviously has a huge impact on us as we're growing up and knowing what is acceptable. We're not necessarily taught that we can say no to behaviours that impact us. And I certainly didn't know that by the time I got into a relationship with my husband. I wasn't aware that actually I could have said no. I just assumed because I'd never been taught to say no or never shown to say no, it was okay for his behaviour. If I'd known, perhaps, either I wouldn't have necessarily chosen him. I perhaps wouldn't have chosen to run away from my parents because of their behaviour towards me unconsciously. And nor would I have then gone from my husband to my partner relationship without taking the time that I was sensing I needed between relationships. But I didn't, because I didn't know that I could do, really. There was a sense within me that I needed to, but there was also this feeling within me that I wasn't good enough unless I had a partner. I've now been probably about 6 or 7 years now without a partner, and I'm fine with being on my own. Yes, it would be nice to have somebody to go out and perhaps go for dinners with or just do things together. So let's talk about the red flags that I'm now very much aware of and why it's so important to not put yourself straight into a relationship without first seeing what really goes on, without having those conversations, especially as an older person, about previous relationships. Now, you don't have to go into massive details, far from it, but the red flags will show up if you take the time to ask questions. And it's not even a question and an answer kind of situation. It's inquiring about a previous relationship and why it ended. What was it? And within those endings, there are warning signs. Like, I knew my partner hadn't had many girlfriends originally, my husband, that is. But I could only ask questions about his family. And if I'd bothered to ask those questions, or at least with hindsight, I could have seen the kind of behaviour his parents had. And that was one of his father domineering his mother, very much a controlling person who dictated financially, emotionally, and physically what happened within the family. I can remember going through my divorce and having to sign a piece of paper to say what I'd taken out of the home, that I had to leave. But my husband didn't have to. He could just take whatever he wanted and nothing was said. That's control. And as I say, if you're aware of this, you can prevent it happening again in your next relationship. My husband basically chose how he would behave at work, and consequently he would frequently land up losing his job. So it fell to me to support us financially. He didn't think anything of not supporting through a paying job our lifestyle, the house he wanted to live in. He would criticize me for not doing some DIY that he had no contribution to. And in fact, his knowledge of DIY was non-existent, but he still criticized me. And those warning signs were there before I even seriously become involved in our relationship. It was like his dedication to his family for some unknown reason. And that was because he wasn't willing to stand up to his family. I was seen as somebody who was acceptable because I did what they wanted me to do. Be good, to show up when they asked me to turn up. But not my partner, not my husband. He would deliberately be late turning up to meet me. He'd come up with excuses as to why he didn't turn up on time. And as I say, he was the kind of person that expected me to do things, but didn't do anything himself. That's manipulation, that's control. He would criticize me for something I did, but he never actually did it himself. So why would he criticize me? Because that was a control. And I unwittingly allowed him to do that control. Jealousy was something he was very good at. If I dared to talk to another man, I'd be accused of having a relationship with him. And yet, how could I? Because I was always expected to be at home if I wasn't physically at work. And if I was at home, I was expected to be doing something like sorting the garden out or doing DIY. And even though we went to his parents often, I didn't often get to see my parents. He would isolate me from my parents. I would say, oh, let's go and have some dinner with them. Let's arrange a dinner on Sunday. And it was always an excuse not to go. And if I suggested, well, I'll go and see them myself, there was a reason why I shouldn't go. And I realized afterwards that he actually stripped me of my confidence. In his behavior, in his constant criticism, in his constant questioning of me, I lost trust in myself. I lost the confidence to be able to stand up for myself and say, I'm not prepared to accept this. Partly because I hadn't been shown what was acceptable and what wasn't by my own parents, due to their own behaviour towards me, of not showing me love, of not hugging me or telling me they loved me. Yes, they looked after me, they supported me as much as they could financially, but there was no real encouragement. There was no guidance as to, well, you could do this or you could do that. It was a case of having to find out for myself. So it wasn't necessarily helpful for me to then be able to stand up to my husband and say, well, actually, you need to help us financially. You need to contribute. What was so silly was that when I met my husband, he didn't give that impression that he was going to be controlling. He deliberately went out of his way to make sure he met my needs, made me feel good about our relationship. And that's the thing about any kind of toxic relationship. It starts like a good relationship, as if it's going to be perfect. They do their best to accommodate what you need. But then when they start to know that you do the things that they gently introduce, it then starts to change. Like, he would want to go to the wine bar. I didn't necessarily want to go, but it would be a case of, well, I'm going to go. If you don't want to come, that's fine. But then there was this guilt trip, the manipulation, that I wasn't going to see him if I didn't go. And that was made even worse after I divorced my husband and went with my partner. The thing that made me realize with my partner was the fact he didn't turn up on time, even when we first started getting together. But there was nothing within me that said this was unacceptable. It was just a continuation of the kind of relationship I'd had with my husband. So I didn't think to question it. It did irritate me, I must admit, but it was like, he made me feel good. He made me feel special. And that's the thing. They make you feel special. And then there was the situation where he would separate me from my friends. He would always suggest we went with his friends, and yet if I suggested going and seeing my friends, it wasn't convenient. It was the days that he was actually going to be working unexpectedly, so it wasn't convenient. And if I went on my own, I'd be getting phone calls. Where are you? What are you doing? But again, it didn't register that he was trying to control me, because it was the norm. I'd had it with my partner, my husband. I'd had it sort of through my family, in the sense of they didn't make me do stuff, but it was always a case of I was expected to do. I was expected to be there for my sister. I was expected to help with the household. I was expected. And there had been no guidance to warn me that I could object. And ironically, it wasn't until after I was divorced did I discover that my parents had wanted to say something to me about my husband that could have prevented me from marrying him. But they didn't, because they didn't know how to speak with me. For me to understand, they were trying to protect me. And it's an interesting reflection just how much I continued the behaviours that were present in my family already with my parents' parents. I was just repeating the family patterns. And that's scary. Just how much do we repeat our family patterns? With my partner, he would threaten me. He would physically hit me. And that, he said, was making sure I did as I was told, that I didn't argue with him. And because I'd already lost so much of my confidence with my husband, I didn't have the courage to stand up to him. It wasn't until I landed up having to go to work with a black eye that I finally stood up for myself and said, "Get out. I'm not accepting this anymore." But then the harassment started in different ways. He'd turn up at the door and just keep thumping it until I opened it. Or he would meet me on the street and start threatening me. It was, I suppose there's one way of putting it, was I no longer had control of my life. I was fearful. And yes, I could have gone and reported him to the police. But that wouldn't have stopped him subtly phoning me and saying things to me that made me feel unsafe. And I won't repeat them because they weren't very pleasant. But he knew how to make sure he kept me in a place of fear. Having isolated me from my friends, from my family, I didn't have people to turn to. And even the one time I turned to my parents for help, knowing what he was like if he decided to get violent, I would not bring my parents into that argument. I did not want my father being hurt or my mother suffering because my father had been hurt by him. Although I know from experience with my husband, he did threaten my parents a couple of times because he wasn't getting his own way. And that meant my father could have lost his job if he carried through the threat. But again, I didn't know this until after I divorced. And this is the thing with toxic relationship, with red flags. It's what you don't know that does as much damage to you as what you do or don't see even, but is happening to you, but you're only aware of it after it finishes. The manipulation would be, I'd have to pay for things because he wanted it. And if I didn't pay for them, I'd then be feeling as though I was not worthy of his attention. He would deliberately isolate me from him, making me think that I'd done something wrong. And yet now I'm a totally different person. I'm strong. I won't accept that behavior. But at the time, I was not aware of that behavior. I wasn't aware that I had to make his dinner and it was acceptable if he didn't turn up to eat it. And yet, if I didn't make it, I was made to feel really guilty. The isolation that he created in my life led me to not have friends, to question who I really was. What did I really want from the relationship towards the end? And even if we went out together, it was always, well, let's do this rather than what I wanted to do. And it just got worse. The longer the relationship went on, the harder it became to step away. And the thing about it is, how my husband behaved, how my partner behaved, how my parents behaved, also reflected in the environments I worked in, where the managers controlled what I was able to do, how I could take action. I was supposed to be in charge of a team. And yet when I suggested changes, those changes were constantly undermined. It wasn't seen as beneficial for me to actually go in and improve the system to make sure that the system worked so they didn't get clients' complaints. I got told off for doing that. I was undermined. If I ever had time off, I'd come back and find that something had changed again, back to the old system, because they didn't like it. How could I run a team when my very authority was being questioned and undermined by somebody else's behaviour? I would be in meetings and I would be talking and I'd be overspoken because what I was saying, despite the fact they'd agreed to it in a private meeting, when it come to a group meeting, that was a different matter altogether. They deliberately disagreed with me. But it was eye-opening, I suppose, to realise after I'd moved out of that environment, after I'd become self-employed, after I'd left my husband and my partner, and began the healing journey of recognising who I was and disassociating with a lot of the people that had caused me harm. And that included my own family, although I couldn't walk away from my mother. It made a difference. I saw things differently. So if you're in that kind of toxic situation where you're being manipulated, controlled, made to feel unworthy, not worthy of having a say in your own life, of lacking confidence, being financially challenged, because my husband, as I said, expected me to produce all the money to support us. And yet with my partner, he earned better money than I did. But I was still expected to pay for all the household expenses. Despite the fact he lived in the house, he contributed nothing. I would have to feed him. He would use all the facilities, but didn't contribute. He thought it was his right. And yet he earned more than me and would spend it on drink and drugs. He wrecked my car because he was out getting drugs. And yet when I complained about it, he didn't think anything of it, that he'd created a situation where I had no means of transport to get me to see my parents or to get to work even at times, because where I lived made it hard to get to work without a car. But he didn't think anything of it. So being aware before you go into any kind of relationship is essential. You do not want to put yourself in a situation where it's hard to come out again. I know for myself, walking away from my husband was a lot easier than walking away from my partner, because although my husband was emotionally manipulative, He never actually physically threatened me, whereas my partner would frequently threaten me. And you might not even realize that there's going to be the physical threats and the physical abuse. But the warnings can be there if you ask the questions, or at least explore how their previous relationships were. And this is vital for your own safety. I recognized after I'd finished my relationship with my partner just how unsafe I felt. And if I'd really listened to what I felt when I was first with him, I would have realized he was one big red flag. But I didn't. So all I can say to you now is, look at the behaviors, inquire about previous history. It's better to walk away if you're uncertain than to put yourself in a situation where you cannot walk away at all without considerable fear. It's hard, I must admit, to be able to walk away from something that looks promising on the surface, but it's what's underneath that matters. And for your own safety, for your own mental health, please take the time to explore that person's history to protect yourself. I hope this helped. Thank you for listening and watching if you watch on video. Take care of yourself. You matter far more than anything else. I look forward to speaking with you soon. Bye for now.